You watch everyone else find their place, while you quietly wonder why yours always seems just out of reach. Friendships begin with promise, but slowly fade. Conversations become shorter. Invitations become fewer. You scroll through photos of people surrounded by others, while you sit in another quiet evening, asking God the same question you have whispered so many times before. Why does this keep happening to me? You never wanted to feel different. You never asked to carry this constant feeling that you are somehow standing just outside the place where everyone else belongs. The hardest part is not even being alone. The hardest part is wondering if your loneliness means something is wrong with you. You pray, but some days the silence feels louder than the words you speak. You tell yourself to be grateful, to stay faithful, to trust God's timing. Yet there are moments when your heart quietly asks whether He still sees you. Those are thoughts many people are afraid to admit, but they are thoughts that faithful men and women throughout Scripture also experienced. They knew what it meant to wait. They knew what it meant to wonder. They knew what it meant to believe while everything around them seemed to suggest they had been forgotten. If this season feels familiar to you, let me know in the comments. Sometimes simply realizing that someone else understands your experience is the first reminder that you are not walking through it alone. One of the greatest misunderstandings about loneliness is believing it automatically means abandonment. Sometimes it does point to relationships that need healing. Sometimes it reveals places where we need to grow in wisdom or vulnerability. But there are also seasons when solitude becomes a place where God quietly shapes a person's character in ways that constant noise never could. Think about the moments when you felt rejected. Maybe someone walked away without explanation. Maybe you invested deeply in people who never valued you the same way. Maybe you have spent years trying to understand why you always seem to care more than others do. Those experiences leave scars, and God never asks you to pretend they do not hurt. He invites you to bring those wounds to Him honestly. Many of the people God used throughout Scripture experienced seasons that looked remarkably ordinary on the outside, yet felt painfully lonely on the inside. Before public purpose often came private preparation. Before influence came obscurity. Before confidence came dependence on God. Their stories remind us that waiting is not necessarily evidence that nothing is happening. Often, the deepest work is taking place where no one else can see it. Perhaps your loneliness has also revealed something unexpected. Maybe it has taught you compassion for people who feel invisible. Maybe it has made you slower to judge and quicker to listen. Maybe it has deepened your prayers because there were days when prayer was the only conversation that truly felt safe. Those quiet changes rarely receive applause, but they matter deeply. God is often more concerned with forming your character than with changing your circumstances as quickly as you would like. That does not mean you should stop seeking healthy relationships or isolate yourself intentionally. God created people for community, encouragement, and mutual care. Continue opening your heart with wisdom. Continue showing kindness. Continue allowing trusted people into your life. Hope is not passive. It keeps taking faithful steps even when the destination remains unclear. Sometimes we expect God to remove every difficult season immediately, yet Scripture repeatedly shows Him walking with His people through those seasons instead. His presence does not always eliminate loneliness overnight, but it reminds us that loneliness does not have the final word. The valley is real, but it is not the destination. As you continue watching, consider reflecting on the ways God has already sustained you through moments you once thought you would never survive. There may be quiet evidence of His faithfulness that you only recognize when you look back. If you have seen even a small glimpse of that faithfulness, share your story in the comments. Someone else may find hope through what God has already done in your life. Maybe you still do not understand why this season has lasted as long as it has. Maybe the answers you want have not come yet. That uncertainty can be painful, but uncertainty does not mean God has stopped working. Your value has never been measured by how many people stay, how often your phone rings, or whether others fully understand you. Your identity rests first in the One who knows every hidden fear, every silent prayer, and every tear you have never explained to another person. The story is not finished. The loneliness you feel today does not define the rest of your life, and this season does not have to become your identity. Even when you cannot yet see the purpose clearly, you can continue taking one faithful step at a time, trusting that God is able to bring growth, wisdom, compassion, and hope from places that once seemed filled only with silence. There is another kind of loneliness that is even harder to explain. It is the kind that exists even when you are surrounded by people. You smile during conversations, answer when someone asks how you are doing, and fulfill your responsibilities. Yet inside, you carry the quiet feeling that no one truly knows what your heart has been carrying. You wonder whether anyone would understand if you told them about the prayers you have repeated for years, the disappointments you never shared, or the nights when you ask God for strength simply to face another morning. That hidden loneliness can slowly convince you that you are invisible, but invisibility before people is not the same as invisibility before God. One of the greatest temptations during a long season of isolation is to allow your circumstances to become your identity. You stop saying that you are going through a lonely season and begin believing that you are simply a lonely person. There is an important difference. Seasons change, identity remains. Scripture continually points us back to the truth that our deepest identity is not built upon what other people think of us, but upon the God who created us, knows us completely, and continues to call us his own. That truth may not instantly remove the ache, but it gives the ache a foundation that it never had before. Your loneliness may describe part of your experience, but it does not define who you are. Perhaps you have noticed that difficult seasons have a way of revealing what easier seasons often hide. When life is full of activity, it is easy to avoid questions about fear, insecurity, forgiveness, or trust. Silence has a way of bringing those questions into the light. At first that feels uncomfortable. You may even wish God would simply remove the silence altogether. Yet sometimes the very place we wish to escape becomes the place where healing quietly begins. Not because suffering is good in itself, but because God is able to work faithfully even within it. Think about the ways your perspective has already changed. Years ago, perhaps success meant being admired, accepted, or included. Now you may find yourself valuing peace more than popularity, authenticity more than appearances, and faithful relationships more than large circles of acquaintances. Those changes rarely happen without struggle. They are often born through disappointment. They emerge after expectations have been broken, and after we discover that the approval of people can never provide the security that only God can give. That realization does not mean relationships are unimportant. Healthy friendships are gifts from God. Family, church communities, and trusted companions can become beautiful reminders of his care. The danger comes when we expect another human being to satisfy the deepest needs of our hearts. People, even the best people, are limited. They misunderstand. They become busy. They fail. They need grace just as we do. When we recognize that, we begin to appreciate others without placing upon them a burden that only God can carry. If these reflections describe something you have been experiencing, I would love to hear your story in the comments. Your experience may encourage someone who has been quietly wondering whether anyone else understands this kind of journey. There may also be people you have not forgiven, not because you enjoy holding on to resentment, but because their absence left questions that were never answered. Someone promised they would stay and then disappeared. Someone who should have protected you instead wounded you. Someone whose opinion mattered deeply made you feel small. Those memories can quietly shape how you approach every future relationship. Without realizing it, you begin expecting every goodbye before it happens. You keep part of your heart protected because disappointment has become familiar. God never asks you to pretend those wounds never happened. Instead, he gently invites you to place them into his hands. Forgiveness is rarely a single emotional moment. More often it is a repeated decision to stop allowing yesterday's wounds to dictate tomorrow's hope. That process takes time. It requires honesty. It often requires tears. Yet little by little, God can soften places within us that we believed would remain permanently closed. There is something remarkable about the way God often works. He does not waste experiences that seem meaningless. The compassion you now have for lonely people may exist precisely because you know what loneliness feels like. The patience you show someone who is struggling may have grown from your own unanswered questions. The encouragement you offer another person may come from the comfort God quietly gave you during nights when no one else knew you were hurting. What once appeared to be empty years may eventually become years that equipped you to love others with greater depth and understanding. You may still ask why the process has taken so long. That question is understandable. Waiting stretches our faith because it forces us to trust before we see the outcome. Yet throughout the Christian life, hope has never depended upon having every answer. Hope grows through remembering God's character. His faithfulness yesterday becomes strength for today, even while tomorrow remains unknown. Perhaps this season is inviting you to notice something you have overlooked. Even in your loneliness, God has sustained you. You are still here. You have survived disappointments that once felt impossible to bear. You have continued praying even when answers seemed delayed. You have continued believing even when your emotions fluctuated. That perseverance is not evidence of your own strength alone. It is often quiet evidence of God's sustaining grace working beneath the surface, even when you did not recognize it at the time. As you reflect on your own journey, resist the temptation to compare your timeline with someone else's. Every life unfolds differently. Some people find lifelong friendships early. Others experience years of unexpected solitude before discovering relationships marked by greater maturity and mutual care. Comparison often steals gratitude for what God is presently doing because it keeps our attention fixed upon what someone else appears to have. The truth is that your story is still unfolding. There are chapters you cannot yet read because they have not yet been written. That uncertainty can feel uncomfortable, but it also leaves room for hope. God's faithfulness has never depended upon your ability to predict the future. It has always depended upon His unchanging character. Even when you cannot trace every detail of His work, you can continue trusting the one who has promised never to leave His people. The silence may still be present today. The questions may not all have answers yet, but the quiet work taking place within your heart may be preparing you for a depth of faith, compassion, wisdom, and dependence upon God that could not have been formed any other way. One day you may look back and realize that what felt like the loneliest road of your life became the place where you learned most clearly that you were never truly walking alone. There may come a day when you look back over your life and realize that the moments you once tried hardest to erase became the places where your faith grew the deepest roots. Not because the pain itself was good, and not because loneliness was something God delighted in, but because His presence became clearer when everything else that once gave you confidence had been stripped away. Many people spend their entire lives surrounded by noise, never discovering who they are apart from the opinions, expectations, and approval of others. Your journey may have been different. The quiet has forced you to ask questions that comfort never would have asked. It has invited you to discover whether your hope could survive when circumstances stopped making sense. It has gently exposed the difference between trusting God because life is easy and trusting Him because He is faithful even when life is difficult. Those lessons are not learned quickly. They are formed slowly, often through ordinary days that seem insignificant while they are happening. Perhaps you have wondered why your path has looked so different from everyone else's. You watched friends build families, careers, communities, and routines while your own story seemed filled with unexpected detours. You celebrated other people's blessings while quietly asking God whether He had forgotten yours. Sometimes you even felt guilty for asking those questions because you wanted to be grateful, yet your heart still carried disappointment. God is not surprised by those emotions. Throughout Scripture, people who loved Him deeply cried out with honest questions. Their faith was not weakened because they admitted their pain. In many cases, their honesty became the very place where they encountered God's faithfulness more personally. There is freedom in realizing that faith is not pretending everything is fine. Faith is continuing to walk with God even when everything is not fine. It is choosing to believe that His character remains constant even when your feelings rise and fall. It is bringing Him your confusion instead of hiding it. It is continuing to pray when answers seem delayed because you trust the one who hears every prayer, even those spoken through tears. Perhaps one of the greatest transformations that happens during long seasons of loneliness is the quiet reshaping of your heart. The need to impress people begins to lose its grip. The fear of missing out slowly gives way to gratitude for what is already present. The desire to be accepted by everyone is replaced with the peace of knowing that you do not have to be understood by everyone to be known completely by God. That kind of freedom rarely arrives all at once. It grows little by little as your confidence shifts away from changing circumstances and toward the unchanging love of God. You may even discover that your compassion has become deeper than it once was. When someone else feels overlooked, you notice. When someone sits alone, your heart moves toward them. When another person quietly struggles, you recognize the signs because you have carried similar burdens yourself. What once felt like meaningless suffering has given you the ability to reflect God's kindness in ways you never imagined. Sometimes our greatest ministry is not built upon our greatest successes, but upon the places where God's comfort met us during our deepest weakness. The Apostle Paul wrote about receiving comfort from God so that we could comfort others with the comfort we ourselves had received. That is not merely a beautiful idea. It becomes reality every time someone who has known loneliness chooses compassion instead of bitterness, hope instead of despair, and faith instead of surrender. If this message has reminded you that God has been carrying you through a difficult season, share that encouragement with someone else. Your testimony does not have to be dramatic to matter. Sometimes a simple reminder that God remained faithful through an ordinary season of waiting becomes exactly what another weary heart needs to hear. There are still things you do not know. You do not know every person you will meet. You do not know every opportunity that will come. You do not know how every unanswered prayer will unfold. But you do know something that is far more important. You know that God has remained faithful until now. You know that every morning His mercy has met you again. You know that He has sustained you through days you once believed would break you completely. Those truths become anchors when the future feels uncertain. They remind you that hope is not wishful thinking. Hope is confidence rooted in the character of God. Imagine for a moment speaking to the version of yourself who first entered this lonely season. That person believed the silence would last forever. That person thought every closed door meant life would never change. That person could not yet see the quiet strength that would develop through perseverance. You would probably embrace that earlier version of yourself with compassion. You would tell them that they are stronger than they realize, that their tears have been seen, that they should keep praying even when answers seem distant, and that their worth has never depended upon how many people stayed beside them. In many ways, that is exactly how God has been caring for you all along, patiently, faithfully, gently, never forcing you forward, but continually inviting you to trust Him one more day, one more prayer, one more step, one more act of faith. There will still be difficult days. There may still be moments when loneliness returns unexpectedly. Healing is rarely a straight line. Growth often includes setbacks. Yet even those moments no longer have to convince you that you have been abandoned. They become reminders to return again to the God who has never stopped walking beside you. His presence is not measured by your emotions. His faithfulness is not determined by your circumstances. His love does not increase when life is easy or disappear when life is hard. It remains steady because it flows from who He is. So if you find yourself ending another day in a quiet room, wondering whether your story matters, remember this. Your life is not defined by empty chairs around your table or unanswered messages on your phone. It is not defined by the people who misunderstood you, rejected you, or walked away. Those experiences are chapters in your story, but they are not the title of your story. The title is written by the God who continues to redeem, restore, and renew. He is still shaping your character. He is still teaching you to trust. He is still reminding you that your identity is secure in Him. Even if you cannot yet understand every reason for this season, you can choose to believe that your life has meaning, because the one who created you never creates without purpose. One day, whether in this life or in the fullness of God's eternal promises, every unanswered question will finally meet perfect wisdom. Until then, you're invited to keep walking faithfully, to keep loving generously, to keep hoping courageously, and to remember that you have never taken a single step outside the reach of God's care. You may have often felt alone, but you have never been beyond His sight. You may have felt forgotten by people, but you have never been forgotten by the one who knows your name, counts every tear, hears every silent prayer, and remains with you through every season. Hold on to that truth. Let it steady your heart. Let it strengthen your faith. and let it remind you that the God who has carried you this far will continue to walk beside you, one faithful step at a time.